Hey Boomer is a podcast for people over 55 who are looking for inspiration, motivation, who want to be continuously involved in their lives and in their community. And listening to the conversations with our guests provides that inspiration and motivation. Today we're talking with Deb Richardson-Moore. Deb was a journalist for 27 years at the Greenville News. Then she became a pastor at a mission-driven church dealing with homeless people and addiction. And then she became a mystery writer. Our far-reaching conversation talks about her time in the journalism field, her transition to pastor for the homeless, and how she creates stories, letting them evolve. And she talked about the vulnerability that it takes to be a writer and tamping down that inner critic that sometimes keeps us from reaching our dream. My name is Wendy Green. This is Hey Boomer, and I'm so glad that you're joining us today. Hello, Hey Boomer listeners. I hope everybody is having a wonderful Monday. As you remember, last week we spoke about living your legacy. And we talked about legacy meaning leaving something for the world, being bold and inspiring and vulnerable. And isn't writing a book kind of like that? When you create a book, and even more so when you get it published and you share it with the world, aren't you actually giving something of yourself to the world? You're creating something that didn't exist before, and it's vulnerable. If any of you have ever tried to write something, a blog, a poem, a book, it's vulnerable to put your words out there where other people can see them and comment on them. But writers give us readers a gift of losing ourselves in their story. It's a gift of relating to the characters, relating to the places they go, finding characters that we love and characters that we don't like so much. And we're okay when those characters lose at the end. And we get to explore and travel and experience totally different realities than what we might be living. So my guest today, Deb Richardson-Moore, is an author, and she's written several different books. She wrote her first book, I believe it was her first book, was a memoir called The Weight of Mercy. And that was written when Deb was a pastor at a church and working with homeless. And we'll talk more about that. But she's also written some mysteries. She wrote a mystery series, and then she wrote her most recent book, which is also a mystery, called Murder Forgotten. So what makes a good mystery? Well, a good mystery piques your interest at the beginning, right? And then as you're reading through it, you're trying to pick up the clues. You're trying to figure out, well, could this person have done it? Maybe that one? Oh, no, that clue took me way off a different path. And at the end of every chapter, you're sitting there going, okay, let me see. If I put this there with that. And so you become like this amateur detective as you're reading a mystery. And I have to say, that's exactly what happened with me as I was reading Murder Forgotten. It was an engrossing mystery story. And it really wasn't until the end that I started to gather all of the clues that had come together and figure out, oh, okay, now I'm getting it. But then there was always this twist at the end, right? So we're going to talk about that book as we go forward. And I just wanted to let you all know that a bunch of us did our forest bathing experience last week. It was wonderful, very nurturing, and I want to thank everyone who attended. I want to thank all of the sponsors. I want to thank our gracious guide and host, Angie Stiegel. And as soon as I get pictures back from that, I am going to post all of that in a blog so you can see some of what we experienced. And also I will be sure to note the sponsors so that you can also reach out and thank and support them. We are also planning another event for June. This is going to be a virtual seminar, so everybody can attend. And it's going to be a panel discussion with some amazing experts in the field of aging. We're going to be talking about thriving after the pandemic, and thriving being the operative word. So look for more information on that. If you would like to be part of the email list to get information about what's going on, to get a reminder Monday morning so you don't have to go searching for the link, you can email me at wendy@heyboomer.biz. You can also go to the website at heyboomer.biz, and you can sign up there, subscribe to the blog, and that will automatically add you to the email list. So we'd love to have you as part of our community. Please go ahead and join that. And I also want to encourage you. This is a conversation between Deb and myself, but is also a conversation between Deb and all of you. So if you have questions or comments that you'd like to share with us, you can go ahead, include them into the chat. And as they come in and as they seem to fit into the conversation, I'm going to bring them to your attention, or bring them to Deb's attention. And I see lots of people saying hi already. They love your book, Deb. So let me bring you on. They love all of your books. I'm seeing a lot of this great stuff, and they're putting posts to where they can find it. Yeah. So you have a big fan audience out here. I want to tell them a little bit about you first. So Deb Richardson-Moore is an author, and she's the retired pastor of Triune Mercy Center, which is a mission church in Greenville, South Carolina, that brings homeless, working poor, middle class, and wealthy parishioners into community. That's pretty amazing. She worked for 27 years as a writer for the Greenville News, and then she received her Master's of Divinity degree in 2005 when she accepted the position as pastor at Triune Mercy Center. Deb is the author of a memoir, as we mentioned in the beginning, The Weight of Mercy, about her first 3 years as pastor among the homeless. And this book was named to the 2016 reading program for the United Methodist Women Worldwide. She then published her Branigan Powers mystery series. And the 3 books in that series are The Cantaloupe Thief, The Cover Story, and Death of a Jester. And these are set against the backdrop of a homeless encampment. Her most recent book, Murder Forgotten, is a standalone mystery, and it is set on the South Carolina coast. Deb was given the 2020 Humanitarian Award by United Housing Connections, which also announced they're going to name a community center after you. That's very much of an honor. Good for you. She has won numerous other awards, and she is the graduate of Wake Forest University and Erskine Theological Seminary. She's married to Vince Moore, and they have 3 grown children, Dustin, Taylor, and Madison. And which one is getting married soon?
Dustin.
Yay, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
So are you ready to jump in?
Yes, yes.
All right, let's go. So from my perspective, you've always been a writer. And I am curious about from where that initial love of writing came from.
Oh, I think that was just innate. I remember in the 2nd grade, my teacher gave me a challenge, and she said, I think you need to do something above what I'm asking in the coursework. And she said, and I said, like, write a book. And she said, yeah, do that. Well, I wrote a book called How the West Was Won.
In second
Not
grade.
really realizing the book had been written before, far better than a second grader was going to do it. But I wrote it. And so yeah, that's where it started. And then I'm probably like every other mystery writer in the history of the universe. I read every Nancy Drew book, Hardy Boy, Bobbsey Twin, and then graduated to Agatha Christie. And I just loved that. So in the back of my mind, I guess I always wanted to write something like Agatha Christie did, but it just took me many, many decades to get there.
So you always knew you wanted to be a writer in some form. So when you went to Wake Forest, did you get a journalism degree?
Actually, I knew I was going into journalism. Wake Forest did not have a journalism degree. Their theory was you work on the student newspaper, you learn journalism by doing it, by practicing, and you major in something you wanted to write about. So I majored in political science.
Oh, okay. All right. So then you went from there to your job at the paper.
Right. Mhm.
Can you talk to us a little bit about your experience at the paper?
Yeah, I loved that. I loved because I was a feature writer, just almost from the get-go. And I loved going in, learning a topic, whatever that was, from beginning to ending, whether it was just a person or an event or whatever. But just every story was sort of a mini research project. And you got out and you got to talk to people and you got to meet such interesting people and then come back to the office and create the story. So I loved both halves of that process.
27 years, Deb.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
27 years. And during that time, were you still pondering mystery writing? Were you thinking about writing a
Um,
book?
not actively. I think at one point, well, I know at one point I took about a year or 9 months off. I was having one of the children. And during that time, I started trying to write what turned out to be The Cantaloupe Thief. But at that point, I just could not get going on. Of course, I had a toddler and then a newborn, and I just could not make any progress on it. And so I put it aside and didn't return to it till nearly 25, 30 years later. Mm-hmm.
Wow. But you still had the bones of it from
Uh-huh.
way back then. Interesting. All right. So 27 years into your career, you decide to make a complete pivot.
Mm-hmm.
What brought that on?
Well, as I say, God tricked me into seminary. No, what happened was I had taken on the religion beat. And a lot of times, what would happen when I would take on a new beat is I would go to classes. Like when I took on the art beat, I went over to the Greenville County Museum of Art and studied paintings, for a while.
Okay.
And just to bone up a little bit. And that was all in the world that I was doing. I'd taken on the religion beat, and I told the managing editor, I said, I need to learn a little more. I'm going to go to some classes. And he said, that's fine. We can probably help you pay for them. And what I meant by that was to go to classes in comparative religion, to learn
Okay.
Buddhism and Islam, because I'd grown up in Christianity, but I wanted to learn enough, some little something about the others. Well, there was no such, I was looking for a master's, in comparative religion. There was no such thing. Clemson didn't have it. Furman didn't have it. And so, quite by accident, I actually ended up in a seminary, Christian seminary down in Due West, which was Erskine. And just, kind of just loosey goosey, just, entered into my first classes down there, which was a New Testament. And it was just like, oh my gosh, I've always wanted to know this. I've always wanted to know how the Bible came together. And what was so intriguing was in that very first class of seeing how the New Testament writers created their stories. And I was looking at it just exclusively from a writer's perspective of how especially the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, their portraits of Jesus were very much fashioned on who they were and how they wrote those stories depending on their interest and their, who they happen to be. And to me, it was almost like journalism. These were the first pictures that the church had of Jesus because of who those writers were. And so I just was so intrigued by that I got deeper and deeper and decided to go into spending my life among those stories instead of writing for the newspaper.
That is such an interesting perspective to come at it from as a writer.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. And then, so finally, you get into Triune Mercy Center. Were you looking for a church with a mission greater than just being a preacher at a Christian church?
Yeah, I was. That was always, missions had always been my interest in all my churches. I was, a lot of times I would be the mission director, mission coordinator for my Sunday school class, stuff like that. And when I looked at Triune from the outside, I thought, oh my gosh, that's important work. That's what I want to do. Had I known what I was getting into, I probably never would have taken it because it just about killed me. And I did not understand how hard it was going to be and how it was it was really difficult. However, a large part of that also was being an ordained Baptist woman. I didn't have a lot of pulpits open to me either. And so I think that, so when I got into Triune, I do think that kept me from quitting, because I think, quite honestly, a lot of people would have quit because it was not pleasant. And, there were drug dealers and who I was having to deal with all the time, and people quite literally defecating in the breezeway of the church. And just a lot of got spit on, got lied to, got yelled at on a daily basis. And so I think if I had had another opportunity to go somewhere else, I might have quit and done that. But I knew if I quit here, I'm not going to have any place to go, nor did I feel like I should. I felt like if I can't make it here, if I can't love these people, I don't deserve another church.
Oh, wow. That's a tough message. So you included all of that into The Weight of Mercy.
And I was so intrigued by how you opened the show talking about vulnerability, because that was my biggest, and I don't think I've really spoken much about this, but that book was very hard for me to write, number one, because I had to go and revisit a lot of the painful, hurtful early days. But also, I didn't think it was very well written. And I didn't know how to make it better. And I was too afraid to call together a writers group at that point. And I had a couple of ministers who I talked to about it who were also writers, and they said, you got to let somebody read it. And I said, well, I just don't think it's good enough. And finally, Matt Matthews, who was the pastor over at St. Giles Presbyterian, said, Deb, you cannot be the judge of this. He said, you're too close to it. You don't know if it's good, bad, or indifferent. You've got to get it in front of other people. And so at that point, I started sending it out to agents and publishers, because when they told me no, it was like, well, I don't know them. That didn't hurt a lot. And so finally, and a publisher in England picked it up. And so it got published. And later on, that gave me the courage to write the mysteries and pull together a writers group and use it. And they changed. And I always regretted that I had not used that for The Weight of Mercy, that I hadn't let friends see it early on, because they might have suggested improvements.
But isn't it interesting, Deb, that you wrote 27 years feature stories for the paper without that concern, and now you're writing, but this was more personal.
I guess so. Because in the newspaper, I couldn't wait for the things to come out and get the comments and get feedback. But this, woo, number one, book length was a whole different ball game. But number two, yeah, it was so personal. And
Mhm.
yeah, and it was really kind of laying my soul bare. And I
Yeah.
just, that was a whole nother animal.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you got it out there. I'm
Yeah, me
glad you
too.
did.
Me too.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the mystery books because that's more of what you write, and I believe enjoy writing.
Oh yeah, yes, they really are fun.
So, as a writer, do you know where it's going from the beginning? Do you know who your characters are, or does this kind of evolve as you go?
It evolves as I go. And that's the one question that always comes up at every writers conference or anything else. And every writer is different. I met one very famous, Jeffrey Archer, at a conference, and he was saying he writes 150-page. He called it an outline, but that's really more of a skeleton, I think. And then he goes back and adds to that. But I just don't understand how somebody does that. Somebody else may outline and then try to write to certain markers. That doesn't work for me. So what I do is I just start, and then as you're writing, things occur to you and directions, and you know, often you're going to have to go back and change or plant clues or take out a character or put in a character. But that's the only way that is interesting to me. That's
Mm.
how I want to come to my desk every morning, is if I'm eager to see what happens next.
Oh, so you're exploring at
Yeah,
the wow. And
absolutely.
do you become like attached to your characters? Do they become like friends for you?
Mhm.
Huh.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mhm.
All right. So I want to talk about Murder Forgotten a little bit without giving it away.
Uh-huh.
But the story is about a writer,
Right.
which I thought was really interesting. Her name is Juliana, and she describes kind of getting lost in her own mind as she's creating the story. So, is that similar to kind of letting it evolve, or is your experience similar to what you described for Juliana?
Yeah. And what the best time in a book is when, like, you can go for a walk, and that whole hour of your walking, you are living in that other world. And you're thinking about those characters, and you're thinking about what they might be feeling. And so that way, it's almost like you're not really making stuff up as much as you are just listening to what,
Mm.
let your mind just wander. And so that was what I gave to her. And then I went a step further and I gave her this sort of special thing, that where she literally almost has a fugue state or an out of body experience, where her plots come together, and she will emerge from them and just work feverishly for like 24 hours. And because she's a very famous writer and has been very
Right.
successful, and I was trying to create a reason that she was so successful. But then the twist is that, and this again comes from me because my memory is like Swiss cheese. And so I was thinking, and especially at Triune, I was trying to remember names. That was where I really struggled with the names of all these people, because Triune was a very transient place. And it wasn't like a normal congregation where the pastor learned all of the congregants. I had maybe 150 like that, but the other 125 were constantly rotating in and out.
Mm.
And so I was struggling with that. And so I was, and you just start thinking of things, and it was like, okay, what if you were a famous mystery writer, and all of your energy and everything you did depended on your memory, and you started losing it? What
Mhm.
oh my gosh, what might that be like? What might that lead to? And so
Mhm.
that was where that character's predicament came from.
Yeah, it was so interesting. In fact, what's the subtitle? How can you find the truth when your reality is fading?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it definitely winds you through that experience for her. You portrayed that really well.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
But I knew at the same time, I did not want to spend all the time on her because I didn't want people to get depressed or think it was a book about dementia or anything like that. And so I was trying to put just enough of her in to give you the feeling of what she was facing, but then bring in the daughter to do a lot of the detective work,
Hmm.
and just to give the reader not a break, that it wasn't going to all be this struggling character.
Right, right. And the daughter and the friends that she has,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the difficult brother, and
Mhm.
I know it was a lot of good characters in there. Um, and did you change those characters as you went along, or are they pretty much okay?
Oh yeah, especially like it because I think what my problem was in my early books, everybody was perky. My writers group accused me of being terminally perky, and so everybody's good and honest, and that only is not like real life. It's also not very interesting, and
Hmm.
so I have to really work to create a Harrison, the brother,
Mm.
who is not very likable, or the
Yeah, what was her name? Lot.
Liza's. Well,
Right.
I was thinking Liza's boyfriend, who's
Oh,
kind of the
right. Who had the
sleazy
restaurant.
restaurant owner,
Yes. Yeah.
Dick. So that does not come naturally to me. So I have to really try to bring in characters who are edgier and sharper and meaner sometimes.
Yeah. So does your writers group help you with that?
Yeah, yeah. I'll never forget back in The Cantaloupe Thief. It started out, and this is how good a writers group does. It started out, there was Branigan, who was a newspaper reporter, and there was a woman minister at the homeless church. And my writers group said they're too much alike. We can't think, there's
Ah,
not, which because they were both coming from me primarily.
right.
So they said, why don't you make one of them fat? And I said, no, I don't make them fat. And so, but what I did was I made one of them male.
Ah, they were
So
both female originally.
they were both female originally, and I changed the minister to male. And
Uh-huh.
and they were right. That gave them some distance, and they were real good friends, but they weren't so alike. They were very much being able to differentiate. And that's what a writers group can do for you. They don't always give you a solution, but they say this isn't working.
Uh-huh.
This is holding us back from enjoying the story.
Yeah. And so in a writers group, everybody is a writer sharing their stories, and then you come together and critique. Is that how that works?
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
Interesting. Okay. So another thing about the book, Juliana, the writer in the book, really dislikes strongly the publicity tours that she has to
Oh,
do. How do you feel about them?
well, now, if there really is a publicity tour,
Well,
I love that. I've just never been on one, because they don't really, unless you're Nicholas Sparks, we're not really getting that.
mm,
I love the speaking and the podcasts like this, and especially book clubs, and some of that is just now coming back. And speeches, that's great, that's fine. What I don't like is trying to publicize the book, if that makes sense, of trying to go online and promote it and that kind of thing. That is painful for me, and I think most of us, because it just comes across as tooting your own horn. If
yeah.
somebody else invites you to speak, yay,
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
but to, to get out there and try to get people to buy and online, that's the hard part.
Yeah. So, some of the comments I just wanted to share with you that, people are saying hi, they love you, and Ann Golden, Gail Quay, um, Doris, Kathy, and Beth Gaffer. And then Heidi Woody related very much to your comments about working with the drug addiction, the alcohol addiction. She says, yeah, it's good people with an awful disease. I don't know if you'd like to comment on that a little bit more. Oh, Beth also worked with homeless people, very difficult, but very rewarding.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I have friends now that I would have had a way of meeting or knowing before, and I mean that very sincerely, that they are friends that have lived outside. Now, fortunately, one of our things at Triune was that we hired social workers and tried to get them into housing. Sometimes it took us 9 years to convince somebody that they would be better off in housing. And this is America; it was their choice. But sure, that just and when I took the job, I did not realize how much addiction was playing into homelessness, at least in Greenville. Now, that's not always the case, but here it was a huge driver. And so that was where we focused a lot of our energy, was on rehab, starting with rehab and then trying to get people into housing, driver's license, jobs, whatever. But boy, that addiction, that, because you can imagine if an addiction has led somebody to live on the street, it's pretty severe, and they have probably tried repeatedly to kick it. And so yeah, just living with people and learning their struggles. Yeah, it just opens your eyes to a whole nother sphere. But also some of the kindest people I met, that who would share what they had, even though they had next to nothing.
It must have been continuously challenging, though, to see, and what about stories of people that actually broke through that addiction and found homes?
Oh yeah. Well, we estimated, I think we sent about, during my time there, about 1,600 people into drug or alcohol rehab. And we
Wow.
estimated that about close to a third of the men succeeded in getting sober and moving on. And maybe, but women was only about 10%.
Huh.
And we, kind of kept wondering what was behind that. And then we finally learned, talking through to a lot of doctors and addiction specialists, that the woman's brain is very often more complex than the male brain, and it was harder to get her off of drugs and alcohol. And then simultaneously, we learned that a lot of times sexual abuse was behind a woman's that severe,
Yeah.
who's
Yeah.
out on the street. So what we did was we went to Nashville and we learned about a ministry up there, and we joined with Christ Church and Bon Secours to create Jasmine Road, which was a ministry to get women out of the sex trade. And we had hired a woman who was working at Triune to do that very thing. And so then she went on to become director at Jasmine Road. That's Beth Messick. And that they were tackling that idea, because almost all of those women had been addicts, alcoholics, and almost all of them had been sexually molested for the first time between the ages of 7 and 11, and it had literally changed their brain and their brain patterns and all of that. So there was a lot of work to be done, and we are so proud of that ministry that's going forward. So all of that is just it's just a really hard, difficult, not of yarn to start unraveling. There are a lot of pieces to it, and I was not an expert. That's why I hired people to
Hmm.
do that work.
Yeah, you probably learned more than you ever expected to know
Yes,
about
yes, I did.
that. Yeah. So, when you changed your career, and because Hey Boomer is really about
Yeah.
inspiring people to live full lives, to give back to their community, to be involved in whatever way works for them. So, when you changed your career at 51 and you then moved into book writing, what inspired? I mean, we talked a little bit about the inspiration to do the religion, but what inspired the initial? All right, I'm sitting on this cantaloupe story. I'm going to write this way. What inspired you to really sit down and start writing?
Well, the first book was The Weight of Mercy. And what inspired that was I was beginning to forget. And that going in, when I talked about trying to write back at my second baby and I was about 30 years old, I just couldn't. I don't, I to this day, I don't know what was holding me back. But when I got into ministry and I wasn't writing every day for the newspaper, and it was so I just felt like those experiences I was having at Triune were informative, and I didn't want to lose them. And after a few years, I was beginning to forget because things were a whole lot better. We were chugging along. We were getting new members, and I thought I don't want to forget what happened. And so that was why I sat down to write The Weight of Mercy. And um, so once that got done, and I knew I could write a full length book, and that is the hard part because you have this inner critic inside your head saying, "What are you doing? This is boring. Why would you think anybody's interested in this?"
Right.
And so you've really got to bump that thing down. And so once a publisher said, "Yes, we want to publish this," I can't tell you how freeing that is. So that was when I said, "Okay, I want to go write that murder mystery that I've always had in the back of my mind." And literally that was, more than almost 3 decades after I had first tried to write it. So,
Amazing.
but I think all of us need something. We need some kind of boost, and that's what's so hard to this day, is finding readers, and getting enough feedback that you want to go on. And I can't tell you how many writers have books in their desk drawer
Mm.
that either they've never sent out or was sent out and rejected, and you just have to forget about that. And just because I'll send them out. There's no such thing as too many rejections. um,
Mm.
yeah, just over, and you learn not to take that personally, and not to have a thin skin, and to say it's not, they don't know me. They just, for whatever reason, they don't want to publish this book. Maybe they don't like murder mysteries. Maybe they don't like my writing. Maybe they don't like the beach, whatever. But you just can't, they're not saying they don't like you.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Doris says, is there a story to your finding this publisher? You have a publisher out of England, you said?
Yeah. No story really. I was just sending out queries, just like you do. And I'd been turned down by about 17 agents, I think. And so I started saying, well, maybe I can't get an agent, but I'm just going, some publishers would accept unsolicited manuscripts. And so I just started sending them to them.
Hmm.
And this one in England took it. And we've had some bumps in the road because they went into sort of bankruptcy. It's the
Ooh.
UK version. It's not that. It's called something else. Going into
Mhm.
administration, I think. And so then we got after. I think I got all the way through Murder Forgotten, and they were going to take it, but they said they weren't taking any more manuscripts after that. And
Hmm.
so now, but then now in the last few weeks, I've got something, they've been bought again. They've had some sales, so now they're under new ownership, So who knows? Who knows? And believe me, I am not alone. There are so many writers I've met who they were called orphans now, that their
Hmm.
publishers have gone out of business or stopped accepting a certain genre of books, or all kind of different reasons why you
But
lose your publisher.
so are you telling me now that if you have a new book that you're working on, which I want to know about, if you do,
Mhm.
you're going to have to search for a publisher again?
I think so. I think
Oh.
so because Lion Hudson is a Christian publisher, and this latest is not, any overtly Christian in any way. It's a it's a story set in a gentrifying neighborhood in a southern city, because I'm so intrigued by gentrification. And so you have this tension between these new people moving into these 800, $900,000 houses, and the mill houses that have been
Mhm.
in that neighborhood before, and the few people who haven't yet sold out. And so, and then there's homeless, there's a gospel mission and a homeless encampments near that. So there's your tension. And
Mm.
then the murder plays out against that backdrop, and you don't know whether it's got something to do with that or if it was completely a different reason.
Mm. Now, Murder Forgotten is not an overtly Christian
No,
book either.
it's
No.
not, and I was kind of surprised they wanted it. Uh,
Okay.
they I guess because I was already on their roster, they
Hmm.
published it. But yeah, I was like you, and even one of my editors said something at one point as she was going over it. She said, "Do you not want to insert something about and I said, no, I don't think I do. I don't think I want to shoehorn it.
Yeah, yeah, you'd have to make it fit somewhere. And
uh, and
yeah,
there is the character there at the Methodist Church on
right.
Sullivan's Island.
Hmm.
So so there's that, but you're right, it's certainly not overtly Christian at all.
No. So, Deb, what would be two or three takeaways that you could leave with the audience to get them past their vulnerability of taking a risk, whether it's with a new job, a volunteer, writing a story, writing a song? What would be your takeaways for them?
Well, it's kind of what you said in your, I think it was your most recent blog, the when you were talking about dreaming,
Uh-huh.
and that you had had that dream for 6 years
Uh-huh.
before acting on it.
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of us do that. We have something percolating in our brain. I think I mispronounced that word, percolating. um, but in our brain, and maybe something triggers us into it. And so number one, I would say be listening for your innermost desire. Um, and then it doesn't even have to be related. I'm a big believer now. I used to think in terms of success and failure. If a marriage ended in divorce, it had failed. I don't think that way anymore. I think now in terms more of seasons,
Mm.
because that marriage had its season, and
Hmm.
certainly if it produced children, it was not a failure. Or even if it didn't, if you had 20 good years, how are you going to say that's failure? So I see seasons, and I believe in that we have seasons of our life, like you had previous careers, and then you've
Hmm.
created it, now you're in a season of this amazing podcast. And I'm seeing more and more people retiring in their mid 60s with good health. And I think that's a third act. Um,
Hmm.
or depending on what you did. This is my third act,
Right.
for Greenville News, and then ministry, and then writing. Might be somebody else's fourth act, fifth act. But I just think there are opportunities, and there are times in our lives that just open up and give us permission to do things. And a lot of times retirement, it's no longer needing to be paid as much or at all, and so that creativity can thrive then. um
Yeah.
but yeah, just listening to your innermost
Listening.
desires.
I think that's exactly brilliant. listening, because if you're not listening, you don't see those doors, those opportunities open up. So yeah, thank you for that, Deb. And Deb has graciously offered a gift to our listeners. So we're doing a little book contest. She has offered to give away 2 books, The Murder Forgotten Story, but you have to enter to win. And the way you enter is you're going to send me an email. I'll show my email address again. And in that email, you're going to be able to tell us what about the South Carolina coast intrigues you and what would make you want to read Murder Forgotten. So those 2 things. What about the South Carolina coast intrigues you and what would want to make you read Murder Forgotten? Once we get all the entries, let's say by the end of the day, Wednesday, because some people do listen to this later, then we will pick 2 winners and Deb will contact you to get your email address. If you would like to contact Deb, you can look at her website at www.debrichardson-moore.com. And you can read about the other books she has, the things she's doing, as well as contact the author. So this has been fabulous. Thank you so much, Deb, for being my
guest. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me just tell people about who's going to be here next week. His name is Sander Flom. And I was introduced to Sander because of a book he wrote about overcoming stuttering. And I thought, well, that's a pretty big thing to overcome. And then, of course, with Joe Biden dealt with that as well. So I thought, well, that could be interesting. But when I spoke to him, there's so much more. He's 84 years old. He still runs his own company. And I was intrigued by some of the other books that he has written. Like he took a 100-mile walk with his son, and they talked about leadership, and they talked about what does it mean to lead and all these different kinds of things. So Sander is a leader. He's a speaker, even with the stuttering. He's on the board of several universities and hospitals, and he loves what he's doing. And he has mostly overcome his stutter. Just to let you all know that he said to me, oh, can we do the show earlier because he's better in the morning? And I said, well, it's 1:00. That's when we do it live. So he will meditate before we speak, he said, so that he'll be ready for the show. But I think that will be a wonderful, interesting show. And certainly inspiring, 84 years old and still going strong. I always like to end with a quote from C.S. Lewis, where he said, you are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. And with that, I thank you all for joining us today. Wonderful comments. You'll go back and look at them, Deb, later. And I know everybody's time is valuable, so I really appreciate that everybody joined us today. Thank you so much. My name is Wendy Green, and this has been Hey Boomer.